Well, welcome to this tutorial on how to use the hazardous substances category on your NEBOSH NG2 or your IG2 practical project. I'm going to walk you through how you could describe this hazard on your risk assessment and then what legislation. And the legislation is not always obvious. There are different legislations depending on the substance when identifying your controls and also when making your legal arguments. So let's get right into it. Firstly, as usual, we'll have a look at the hazard categories, and here it is. There's just one hazard category for this whole thing, and it's hazardous substances, chemical or biological. You can just say hazardous substances, that will be sufficient. The point NEBOSH are making there is that it could be a chemical substance or it could be a biological substance. And we did cover some biological substances, didn't we, in the course materials? We talked about HIV and hepatitis. More broadly, we have various other biological pathogens. You know, there could be like anthrax spores and parasites and flus, colds, COVID, all of that stuff could be a perfectly valid hazard for you to include on your risk assessment. So you might actually find that you have more than one hazardous substance in your workplace, and that's absolutely fine. If we take a quick look at NEBOSH's sample on this, and if we just do a search for hazardous substances, we'll see, well, straight away we've got one on the screen there. That's dust. And then we've got a second one down here, that's motor oil and fuel. And then we've got another one here, which is paint mist with isocyanates, and that's another one we discussed in the course materials. So you can have more than one hazardous substance provided they are very, very different. So group the similar ones together. If they've got the same harms, the same controls, group those together. But if they've got different harms, different controls, keep them separate. Anyway, how might we phrase this? Well, let's write an example, shall we? So hazardous substances. We need to say what the substance is. You can't just say something like cleaning chemicals. Cleaning chemicals is a bit vague because a cleaning chemical could be soap, it could be washing up liquid, it could be bleach, it could be an acid, it could be an alcoholic solvent, or it could just be water. Water is used for cleaning and it's a chemical. So what is the chemical? That's what we need to get across. So we could say something like various cleaning chemicals are used such as bleach, detergents, and office cleaning products. Okay, now I can kind of picture that. That sounds pretty low risk. That will be fine. But let's say we've got something that's a little bit higher risk. We could say hazardous substances. Maybe you've got some asbestos in the building. We could say presence of asbestos. And this is a separate hazard, isn't it? Because asbestos is very different to your office cleaning supplies. It has a different harm and it has very different control measures. So we're going to keep these two hazards separate. Presence of asbestos in the building, particularly around the windows. Okay, we are good there with two very different hazards. If you're watching this and you're a NEBOSH student, did you know that you have a ton of resources on the Compassa website which you can use? Many of them are very, very cheap. You've got our YouTube section here, loads of free advice here, but if you want some study books, if you want exam technique documents, exam technique guides, instructions on how to do your NG2 or IG2 practical project, you can download those at some very, very reasonable prices from our website. And if you wanted hands-on tutor support with full access to all of our tutorials, guides, me and my colleagues at the tips of your fingers, consider signing up for our NEBOSH Rescue package. You'll get access to our full course and tutor support at a heavily discounted rate. And, well, frankly, you'll struggle to find pass rates that are as consistently high anywhere else. Now, in our who might be harmed and how, obviously we're going to put a who, and then we want a how. The how is the, how do you get exposed? What is the route of entry? Now with these hazardous substances, we want to talk about the route of entry. Is it a skin contact? Is it an inhalation? Is it a splash in the face, in the eyes? Accidental ingestion, swallowing? Is it an injection issue? We need to talk about how is it going to get into the body, and then what effect is it going to have on the body? Is it an acute effect? Is it a chronic effect? What kind of disease are we going to suffer from? So here we could say cleaners and office staff in the area could inhale, there's my route of entry, inhale aerosols and vapors from the products, especially air sprays, and suffer asthmatic attacks or respiratory irritation. There might also be a skin contact issue as well. So cleaners can come into skin contact with these and suffer mild skin irritation or suffer from dermatitis if they have a sensitivity. So now we have pretty clear who might be harmed and how. Now, when we look at the control measures, we need to look at the law because we have to include anything that is legally required because our risk assessment has to bring us into legal compliance. We also should think about the hierarchy of controls because the NEBOSH examiner wants us to show our understanding of how we can eliminate these, substitute things. Now, depending on the substance, there may be different legislation which applies. So let's take a look at the options. Now, if you are a national NEBOSH NGC students, probably your first one that you'll go to is the COSH regulations, the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health Regulations 2002. And, well, you want to include all of the legally required stuff, depending on what the substance is, of course. You know, it's like, if it's a fairly low-grade cleaning chemical, then, you know, you're probably not going to have health surveillance. You're probably not going to monitor exposure or have engineering controls like LEV. But if say you're chopping wood and you have a lot of wood dust or any other kind of dust creating process, you might want to include LEV, local exhaust ventilation. If the dust is known to be harmful and it has an exposure limit, you're probably going to want to monitor the exposure to that through some regular, say, annual monitoring. And you may also need to do some health surveillance, lung function tests. Again, these are legal requirements. There's going to be training. That's the case for practically every hazardous substance out there. And of course, your big legal requirement, which we have here, is the prevention or control of exposure. Every employer shall ensure that exposure of his employees to substances hazardous to health is either prevented or, where this is not reasonably practicable, adequately controlled. And that's a fantastic duty which you could mention a little bit later in your specific legal arguments right there. So if you're introducing an action to reduce exposure, to control exposure, you could use that as a pretty good justification. But maybe not. Maybe you might want to recommend monitoring. Maybe you want to introduce a monitoring program, in which case you might want to use this one instead. So use the duty which is most relevant to the action which you are recommending. And make sure that all of the legal duties are covered off in your two different control columns right there. Again, so you are in legal compliance. Now, there's an exception when it comes to the law. If you have an asbestos hazard, we have a different law. We have the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. And, well, if you remember in your course materials, we have some pretty specific requirements. In particular, we have the duty to manage asbestos and the identification of the presence of asbestos and the maintenance of the asbestos to make sure it doesn't deteriorate, crumble, and create dust. And so we've got all of these duties here. And so, again, make sure you cover those off in the control columns there. And if you have an asbestos related action, you could include it in your specific legal actions down here. Now, international students, NEBOSH IGC students, what have you got? Well, you have the ILO Convention C170, the Chemicals Convention, very easy one to use. And so you could look down here, look at the employer duties. There you are, responsibility of the employers. You've got a load of stuff there. You've got this one in particular about the control of exposure, not exceeding the exposure. You've got things around operational control, limiting exposure, disposal, information training. Take your pick. Loads of stuff there. If you wanted to use an ILO code of practice, there's a code of practice for that convention. So we have the ILO Code of Practice, Safety in the Use of Chemicals at Work. A lot more specific. There's a lot more in here. 80 pages. 80 pages of stuff. There you are. Massive, massive document there. And also, if you have an asbestos hazard, we have C162, the Asbestos Convention. And take a look at this. General principles, protective, preventive measures. Take a look at that. Surveillance, health surveillance. And we also have a code of practice, which you could use. A bit of an old one by the looks of it, but still valid. 90 pages. Duties of employers. Just go straight there. There we are. There are your duties, which you could use in your specific legal arguments right there. Just remember to be really specific as to what the hazard is, what the chemical is, you know, how it's used, route of entry, all of that. Make sure you get all of the legally required stuff in your controls. Use that hierarchy of control of eliminate, substitute, engineer it out, design it out. And then don't forget all your little administrative things like maintenance and training and signage and health surveillance and monitoring. Just have lots of controls. And I'll see you in the next one.